for the demo. Right, so to think about the divisions, we have, we can stick with countries, and then later on smaller or cities. But just to add another layer, we're going to start with a bigger division. Beyond the country, we can sort of say region. So I'm starting with the leftmost column, putting in region. And I'll get to this in, maybe not in order. So list name, the first column, correspond to the question here. So state and municipality. And as I mentioned, the categories of divisions, right? So we're going to start with 2 regions. So I'm repeating the column name here in the list name. And let's go with East Asia Pacific, to which Philippines belong to, and North America, where the US is. And you noticed I filled out the label column first, and I used the proper punctuation. Notice that the regions, continents, whatever you may divide them with, are capitalized, and as opposed to, say, the column headers, which are written all in lowercase. This is for a reason. So the label column are the choices exactly as your enumerators will see in the front end, whereas name, it's going to be the same. You can refer to each of these labels, each of these items, in a more computer-friendly way. So if I wanted, I could have these 2 identical, except spaces and special characters are not allowed. And the more simplified and shorter and more concise, the better, as long as the data analyst can make it out later what they are. So I'm going to shorten it and call them EAP and NA for short, right? So that we know what North America is referred to. It's referred to as NA, lowercase, and East Asia Pacific, EAP for short, in the back end. Right, and there we have our first layer of Cascade, just to experiment and show you. Let's go back to the KOBO, and I'm going to build a form from scratch and start with a blank form. Right, so here you see we have no questions so far. And if you hover over the left part here with these little rectangles in the tower, it says insert cascading select. And you guessed it right, we're going to click on that button. And it says paste your formatted table from the Excel in the box below. You noticed I copied the table. I'm just going to paste it in here. Don't worry if it doesn't look so aligned, it's okay. So when I click done, there you go. Now we have one question automatically in the form builder. And all we did was copy and paste that table. And let's have a look. So as I mentioned, excuse me, the regions are spelled exactly as we type them, proper spelling, capitalization. And as we name the list name column region, we have that too. And just to show you how each item corresponds. So we named them EAP and NA, lowercase. And what do we have here in the right-hand side? Are the XML values exactly as we programmed them in. So these are what your data analysts will see when people respond with each value. So something concise, yet something immediately recognizable, right? So that works. And if you want, you can, spell it out the same way. East underscore Asia underscore Pacific and North underscore America. The uppercase, lowercase don't really matter as long as spaces are by under. Right. Let's add the second layer. Now I'm going to leave a space in between the first and the second layer, but this is optional. You can build it straight into it. But especially when you have a lot of, maybe over 50 or a couple dozen choices, it really helps to have a line break. So we're going to get more granular, so smaller than region, let's say country. And instead of just having Philippines and the US, let's add a couple more neighbors. So Philippines and Indonesia, and then United States and Mexico. And just as the number of items you have, if you're going to repeat the column name or the list name, and then we need to give these computer-friendly names as well. So I'm just going to shorten them and call PHP for Philippines, IDN for Indonesia, USA for United States, MEX for Mexico. Now, great. We have two layers of Cascade. And now the next step would be to make a connection between the first layer and the second layer. Now, here's where these come in, the name column, because we're going to refer to each value by the name column, what we programmed it into the computers. So it's in my interest for this demo to revert it back to EAP and NA, something simple and short. Right, so how we make the connection is we're going to define which regions each of these countries belong to. And we're going to leap over to the next column on the right. And here on as the column header, we're going to put the previous category. So I'm just going to be very careful to copy and paste it onto the next column because spelling and punctuation and extra spaces, if there are, it matters. And I'm going to color code it just so people can make the connection visually. Now, we have the column set as region. And then the next step is to make the connection here. So Philippines, as you know, belong to East Asia Pacific, but we're calling it in EAP in the computer. So I'm going to define it as EAP, same with Indonesia, NA for North America for the US, and same with Mexico. And if you noticed, we just took this column here and made it the header, and then took these values here and then made the connections. So the layer has expanded by one column to the right, and now we have the second layer complete. Now I'm going to copy this again and start from scratch. Now, when you're first getting used to the cascade function, we always encourage you to start from a blank form and start from scratch and really test it out, especially if you have many choices and several layers, because there's always room for error, and you don't want to put a draft cascade into your form before you make sure that it works. Anyway, like magic, now we have 2 questions, 2 layers. Let's see if it works. Okay, so we have 2 regions. If I select East Asia, our 2 options appear. And if I say North America, so do the other option. So great, it worked. And let's have a look. As it stands, it's not so appealing to have the questions named as region and country, right? Because first of all, you may want to capitalize the first letter, but also you want to give your enumerators specific instructions. So let's reword them as please select a region. And the other question also, please select a country. Now that I've changed the wording of the question, let's go to the preview function and have a look. And then what happens? There's an error message. Now, I may have mentioned this, but if I haven't, this is very important. So the first column, the list name column, this corresponds to the categories, the questions, but also, just as importantly, these are data column names, which can be found in the settings for each question. And when we change the wording of a question, KOBO Toolbox automatically changes it. And notice underscores instead of spaces. So it just takes the wording of the question and simply converts it. Now, if you change the wording of the question, you got to make sure to revert back the data column names manually to how you built the cascade exactly. Now, we've reverted the data column names, and when we see it, it works again, right? So the importance of data column name is good to stress here, but you'll see that it will also relate to the calculate function, and we'll get a bit more into that. But for now, let's build the third layer and call it a day with the cascade function. Next level, you guessed it, this will be city. Let's name Manila, of course. If it's not a question, we ask you to please mute your mics. Otherwise, please. Okay, I'll just continue. Cebu, and then Jakarta for Indonesia, then Washington, D.C., and let's say Monterrey for Mexico. Right, so we're just going to give some cities for each country and then give them computer-friendly names. Right. Now that we have the 3 columns filled out, you may have guessed the next steps. We got to make a connection to the previous layer. So we're going to take the country and then move it over to the next column over here. And we're going to make the connection to which countries these cities belong. And without the color coding, you may have been tempted to fill out the field here. But no, the previous level must go in the next column here. Right, so we're just going to quickly define Manila in the Philippines, Cebu in the Philippines, Jakarta in Indonesia, US for DC, and MEX for Mexico. And just a reminder to transfer the name values, the XML values in the backend to make the connection. And now we have a 3-layer cascade, an intercontinental cascade, we can call it. So let's start from scratch. I have copied the tables and pasted it. And we have our 3 layers. And as you see, sorry, I had something in my throat. Excuse me. As you see, we have the cities for each country and region. Okay, and just to re-emphasize, you have the data column name set as city, as we named it. Sorry, my screen was frozen for some reason. And if I rename it, notice it reverts it automatically to match the wording of the question. So in that case, you gotta remember to revert it just as they are written and spelled in the tables. And that was it for the cascade function. Sorry about that, having some throat troubles. And on that note, that was it for Cascade. And I think I went through everything pretty slowly, if not painfully slowly. But I'll pause here for questions before we move on to the calculate function. Okay, let me see. Is there anything in the chat? Right, I don't see anything, so we'll continue. Calculate function is very, very useful too. I'm going to navigate you to the support page also, share the link with you. And what it does, maybe it's best if I give you an example. I think group 4, if I remember right, use the calculate function in their form. And what it, I think you changed the layout by the time we had this training. Let's see. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the Okay. Oops. Maybe it's not worth. I've come this far, so bear with us. Okay. So in this layout, it's actually hard to see the effect of calculate, but I can demo that quickly. So calculate function automatically does some, as the name suggests, calculations in the backend. And this is very useful if you're collecting numeric information. And the details can be found in the support page, and you can use the XLS forms to take it up a notch if you so desire. And there's also this list of calculate functions. So it's not just limited to simple calculations. You can take it much further. But let's demo this very quickly. So we can ask a number question and ask for, let's assume that this is a household survey, and we can say, please specify the number of male adults living in this household. And then the same with, I'm going to just quickly copy and paste the question and add 2 number questions. Right, so we have number of male adults, and number of female adults. And next, we will add, please specify the number of children living in this household. And then we can specify in the guidance hint under 18 years of age, or whatever the definition of a minor may be in the context. So we have 3 items, all represented by number questions. And with the calculate function, with the calculate question rather, down at the bottom here, you can sort of do your own calculations. So in this case, we're going to be adding up the values to the responses of the 3 previous questions. So let's add a calculate question, and you can rename it however. Calculation let's say household number. No. Household I can't spell at the moment. Household population. Right. And if you go to preview, you notice that the calculation doesn't appear in the form. That's because the calculation questions are only in the backend. It shows up as a column in your table view when you're looking at the data, but it's not for the enumerators. So let's say we have 2 male adults, 2 female adults, and 4 children. We haven't programmed the calculation yet, so it's not going to happen. But nonetheless, we have to program it in. So how that happens is we can refer to the value of each question, meaning the responses, by their data column name, right? So by going to the settings, and here's why it's in everyone's interest to keep the data column names short and concise, because if you have to type all of that in, First of all, it's very long, and there's a lot of room for mistakes in the typography. And also, if you saw just this in the tabular format, you don't really have an idea of what's going on. You have to make the column longer and expand it to really see the end of it, and then you maybe have a better idea. So keeping it nice and simple and short is great. So we're going to call it HH for household underscore male. And likewise, we're going to name female adults HH underscore female. And you guessed it, we're going to name the children HH underscore children. And this is how this is where we make the calculation in the question. And I mentioned that you can refer to the value of a question by the data column name. So this is what's going to happen. To refer to a question or to call, I'm going to put in $, curly bracket, and then the data column name. I'm just going to copy and paste for convenience and close the curly bracket side. I'm going to zoom it in here so you can see better. So this is what's going on here. $, curly bracket, and the data column name of our question. Now we're calling the value of the male members of the household question, the number. And then you guessed it, I'm going to add it up by typing in the plus sign, and then female adults. So if you recall, $, curly bracket again, HH underscore female, close the curly bracket. And then lastly, I'm going to yet again add $, curly bracket, HH underscore children. And that is the extent of my calculation. But one thing, if you may remember, is that calculation question doesn't show up in the front end. So you're going to have this value in your data tables, but it's not necessarily going to show. So just for demonstration purposes, we're going to use this, use a note question to demonstrate, and then maybe further get into the calculation. So we're going to refer to this calculation question itself by its own data column name, which is called calculation. That's fine. But if you have, several calculations, it may be in your interest to rename it so that it makes sense. Let's say HH underscore population, just to make it clear. So in the note, in the question itself, you can refer to the calculation by its own data column name. So again, $, curly bracket, HH underscore population, close the curly bracket. Going to show it just to make sure. And this should give you the value. And if I click on it just to test it, I say 3 males, 3 females, 3 children. And then once I click somewhere else, and it gives you the value of those 3 values added up. Now, to make it a bit more user-friendly, I'm going to change the wording of the note and incorporate the calculation into a sentence. So you can say something like, there are, so this will be the number, people living in this household. And you may take it a step further and ask a select one question and add, is this correct? And the enumerators can, verify by clicking yes or no. That's up to you. Let's have a look. So let's say one man, one woman, one child, and it says, as we wanted, there are 3 people living in this house. So that's great. We know the calculation works. It's pretty simple. But want to show you one more thing, is that when these boxes are blank, you may notice this little NaN showing up in your note where you display the calculation. This is not so pretty, and it's it can get confusing in the worst case. But NaN refers to not a number. So when you have blanks and when you add up blanks together, it's not necessarily 0. This error message will show. And the way to avoid that is by setting a default response for each question, each number question anyway. So you can go to settings, and then over here, you have a default response. And by leaving it something like 0, for all of these, and obviously depending on what you are asking, this default response can vary. And you can set it for other types of questions too, apart from numbers. So it will stay at 0 unless the enumerator goes in and changes the information. And then there's no more NaN. Instead, it says 0 until you input the information. As I mentioned, there are plenty more functions to calculate questions than adding it up some. And I'll leave you to explore the more complicated functions with this page. But I'll pause here for any questions. Okay. Yeah, I think that was pretty simple and slow so far. And yeah, apologies again for the throat troubles. When water goes down the wrong hole, it's no fun, especially during a presentation in front of over 200 people on recording. Let's see. So that was the end of Calculate and Cascade, and I had some other brief functions that I wanted to go over. So I'll leave my screen shared. Let's see. So we can go over the cloning function, which is important. As you may have noticed, when you hover over a form, no matter what sort of access you may have, even if you have access just to view the form, you may notice this 2 layers of paper, and it says clone. And this is very useful if you have a form that is actively collecting data, or if you have a form that you want to save or duplicate. So if I click on it, it just says clone project. Enter the name of the clone project, and it's just going to stay that way, but you can change it. And I'm going to click OK. And here I have the exact carbon copy of the form that I cloned, except it's not collecting data and it is still a draft, meaning it's yet to be deployed. And you see that it's added to list of my drafts. And this is very useful, especially if you're wanting to make changes to the form, but you want to save a previous version, for example, or many other uses, just for safeguard measures. It's a great idea. And another function that may be very useful is a translation function. So we're going to go back to the Cascade demo. And I don't have one. So let's see. Going to please provide your first name. I'm going to add a simple question. Maybe two questions. Last name. So first and last name, two simple questions, just text. And in case you want to, for a lot of you working in the Philippines, if you're serving a region and you may need the form translated into Tagalog, it's completely a possibility. It comes with a bit of a caveat, but it's still a great function. So in the Form tab, you have this little section called Languages. And it says this project has no languages defined yet. And to the right-hand side of that, we see a little globe. And here, if I hover over, it says Manage Translations. So if I click on that, it gives me a little message, and KOBO asks me to set a default language. So I'm going to work in English as a default. And default language code, I'm going to call it EN. And when I set it, it gives me the English version. And you can also add as many as you want to. So I'm going to call TG Tagalog and add it. And because the form is in English, I don't need to make any changes, but you can manage your translations by the language codes that you added by clicking on the pencil button here, or you can delete it with the trash can, etc. So if I go edit language, I can change the code. But if I go to update translations, the globe button, it gives me the questionnaire sort of string by string, right? So we only had 2 text questions for simplicity, but if you had select many or multiple, it'll give you the list of choices too. But what I'm going to do is copy the string, and this is part of the caveat. There's no automatic, there's no auto translation function, unfortunately, but I wouldn't really trust that anyway. Not that Google Translate is much better, but it tends to do okay with simple short phrases. I have no idea if this is right, but I trust you will edit later and review and proofread. So sort of string by string, we can incorporate the new languages, in the Manage Translation tab. And I'm going to save the changes. And let's have a look. So when I go to preview, something happens that didn't used to be there before. So before I updated the language, there was only print button, but now it gives me an option to choose language. And if I choose to navigate Tagalog, it gives me the questions in Tagalog, and you can have the whole form in the language that you need to work in, and depending on your enumerators and your surveys. So that's one more useful function that we should cover. I feel like I've been talking for a long time. At this point, we'll pause for questions. And Wes, if you can think of anything.
Chat.
Yeah.
No, Min, I think you've covered quite a bit. I think, despite the fact that we covered a lot of ground quickly in the beginning of this training, I think, well, we've approached the end of it at this point, still covering quite a lot. So I think unless there's anything that comes up between, now and this week, whatever is left over, we can, any questions that come up between now and then, we can certainly cover next week, or, following that, we're always around. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize the time. So before we open up the floor for any remaining things to address, we just wanted to give you a heads up for day 3 of the training. So we're going to skip right into next week and hold it on the week after. So in Manila, this will be Tuesday, the 22nd of March. And because we are accommodating one of our colleagues who is based in Madagascar, part 2 will have to begin a little bit later. So just as today, we're going to start with the roll call, but at 10 a.m. Manila time. And then once everyone's in, we can get underway with the trainings, which will sort of last till noon or so. It may go a little bit over, it may go a little bit shorter, depending on the speed. We'll play it as we go along, as we did today, but you should have a longer break. And then part 2 will resume at 1 p.m. Manila time after lunch. And this will be sort of the agenda. I won't get into the details, but part 2 will cover Power BI and the basics of data visualization. This agenda and the slides will be shared with you, and the link to WebEx will be shared with you within this week. So please keep an eye out for that. We don't have so much homework for prior to day 3. We just have a few request items for the focal points, which is to create a group account for your project. Meaning if you had a project account before and you're happy with it, but it's fine. But if you were using sort of your personal account, or the name maybe isn't so recognizable by other split colleagues in other regions, then maybe it's worth considering making a new account. So for example, if you were, off the top of my head, you could say split underscore CBTA, if I'm getting the acronyms right. And maybe you can specify region or whatever, something more recognizable and professional, especially if you're planning to do knowledge sharing within the DAR, as we encourage. You can also transfer any of your data and your forms that are existing into the new account. So that's something to consider. But also, we would like you to create an enumerator account, just so we can give them different access without access to make any edits or do any admin tweaks. which day 3 will cover further in ODK and configuration. And if you could share those usernames and only the usernames with the gems and with your colleagues whom you think you should have access, share the whole thing, ID and password. And everyone else, I feel everyone has it by now. If you don't already, please create a KOBO account for your personal practice, exploration, experimentation, and sort of repeat the steps that we went over today. Again, the recording will be shared with you after the training. And prior to day 3, just as you did for Google Earth Pro, please download Power BI Desktop. It is also free. And yeah, that was pretty much all we had to cover before day 3. And now we can open it up to any, specific concerns or questions. Okay, given the silence, it's great to know there are no questions or concerns. Maybe we can move on to closing remarks by Ma'am Christie and Melba, and then Wes and I will say goodbye.
Hi, Ma'am Chrissy. Are you around po?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, kanina may meeting kami. Anyway, so we're about to close, or we're now closing the second session for this GEMS training for MNEMIS participants. Now, before we close, we just would like to request our participants to actively raise their questions to our resource persons, because I remember when we had the problem solving session, there were several questions raised for regarding this KOBO toolbox. One is, if I may, Mr. Minanuet and Mr. West, just would like to share some questions raised during one of the workshop. One question is if they can generate it, or rather, how to check the data that were encoded through the KOBO toolbox by their bosses or head of office before they can, or before submission to, before sending the data to the server or KOBO toolbox. Then second is how do they print? Some ask me how do they print those, if they will export the data that were gathered, then how to print, if they can print it out. Those are the two things that I remember during the workshop. So I hope they will raise it here when they are around, or rather when during the session, the questions they have in mind. So I noticed that seldom they ask questions, but after the session, that's where the question are being asked. So I hope on the third session, those because that will be the final session, those queries that they have be actively or vocally raised during this training period. So for now, maybe they can write. I would suggest that they write those questions that they wish to clarify and to be answered next meeting, so that we will know what they have in mind, because we will be using this KOBO toolbox here under this project. So better raise those questions next time. Maybe on a script or whatever, a note, or prepare your notes, and then if you don't want to express it, just type it in the chat box, so that we can actively answer all your queries. And with that, resource persons, the best resource person in town, Mr. Min and Mr. West, can manage to answer all your queries. And for this afternoon, for this day's session, thank you very much, Mr. Min and West, for the time that you have spent with us. Although we are a big group, but I hope they were able to manage the journey for the second day session. And we hope to get the recordings for their review. Okay, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, Melgs.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Christie, for your closing remarks and for encouraging people to ask questions, because that really helps. It helps us know what topics we need to cover better. And of course, hopefully we can answer those questions and help our participants, grow and learn more. So please, if you have questions, if you think of them over the next week, you can send them to Miss Melba, or you can send them to us, or you can even bring them up next time we meet. And there's no need to be shy. But if you are shy, that's okay. You can always send your questions to Miss Melba, and I'm sure she will tell us, because she's not very shy and she's very friendly. So that's all I have to say. Thanks for having a nice session with us. I hope you liked driving around in Google Earth and everything else that we've taught you how to do today. But Min, over to you.
Yes, please. Next time, I hope to hear from them. I hope that more discussions and interaction will be happening next time on the third session, so that it will be remembered, and they will learn a lot if they will ask questions. And we will know that they are still there. I want them to ask to really participate actively. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you guys for attending this session.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ma'am Christie. Thank you, Melba. Thank you, Wes. And thank you, everyone. And on the subject of questions, it's okay if you don't have questions at this point, because real questions will come in really when you take it to the field and have some sort of run into issues and experiences for which we will be there. The training can stop, but we can follow up, and we're happy to sit down with you and answer questions further. So if you don't have questions, maybe that's also a good sign to, as you feel comfortable. If you have questions, please feel free to ask. If you don't, that's okay too. But without further ado, thank you so much for a great training and participation. We'll see everybody next time.
Thank you, Wes and Min. I know it's past midnight where you are. Thank you